What is it you are really working for? Is it for self-indulgence? Is it for the luxuries in life? Is it for self-respect? Is it maybe to put food on the kitchen table, not just for yourself, but perhaps for your family? But ask yourself the question, what are you really working for? Is it a belief that if you give enough of yourself, the system you serve will not discard you when convenient? And most of us accept the exchange without examining it too closely. Our time for their money, our labour for their approval, our loyalty for their protection. We tell ourselves that work is stability, that it is dignity, and that it is worth. But what happens once that exchange becomes unequal? When wages become diminished? And when everything just feels unequal? When that respect has simply gone? Well, back in 1854, in the Lancashire town of Haslingden, one young clerk believed he had found his answer. He wrote it down, then he went into his cellar. On Wednesday morning, 5th of July, 1854, rain fell steadily over Haslingden, soaked the cobbled streets and turned the narrow lane slick beneath a low grey sky. And inside a modest house on Lower Lane sat James HAMER, aged 28, husband, father of 3, and a clerk in the office of a local solicitor, simply known as Woodcocks. At 7:30 that morning, he had written on one envelope, 7:30, raining fast. The line was ordinary, almost banal, but this was no ledger entry. It was written in pencil on the back of an envelope, part of a series of letters he had prepared for specific recipients. Then he added, "I have cut the rope from under the children in bed that I have hung myself with. Preserve this pencil." Lower Lane has long since changed over the years, and the houses in which James HAMER and the area where his house would have been has long since been demolished and replaced with more modern structures. But it is here where HAMER himself would have lived, and it is here where he sadly took his own life. And we do have a photograph which shows a row of houses just on our right hand side, just round about here. And these are the oldest houses, or they were the oldest houses that were here many, many years ago. But as you can see, they've long since gone. But this is Lower Lane and the former location, the home of where James HAMER and his family, his wife and 3 children, once lived. Upstairs, his wife, Mary Ann HAMER, she was fast asleep, and so were their 3 children. But by morning, and when she awoke, James was already dead. When Mary Ann had woke and she went down into the kitchen and she saw several letters, there were 4 in total. One addressed to herself, one to a Mr. George Ramsbottom, one to Thomas Woodcock, James HAMER's employer, and then there was a 4th letter that was addressed to a Mr. Hindle. Each recipient represented a different sphere of James's life: his family, his superiors, the local governing body responsible for administrating poor relief, and the man who paid his wages. But there was still no sign of James, and something was telling Mary not to go into the cellar, and especially alone. Instead, and just before 9 a.m, Mary went out into the rain to the Black Bull Inn and asked her friend Mary Ann Barnes to return with her. Now, Barnes was an acquaintance and would later serve as a witness at the upcoming inquest. "I dare not," Barnes would later admit, but yet she still went. Together, they descended into the cellar beneath a house on Lower Lane, a damp, low-ceilinged space where coal and provision were kept, and at the far end, beneath a roof beam darkened by years of smoke and moisture, they saw James Hamer hanging by a rope. Upon discovering the body of James Hamer, and with him hanging from one of the beams in the cellar, both Mary Ann Barnes and Mary Ann Hamer, they both fled, with Mary Ann Hamer herself going into the kitchen, obviously in complete and utter shock and disbelief. But Mary Ann Barnes, she fled to a neighbour of the Hamers, the Sleddons, Mr. and Mrs. Sleddon. And it was Mrs. Sleddon that first answered the door to Mary Ann Barnes. Now, when Mary Ann Barnes had told of what had been discovered in the cellar of the Hamers, both Mr. John Sleddon and his wife, they made their way down into that same cellar, where they would witness, they would see for themselves the horror that both Mary Ann Barnes and Mary Ann Hamer had just encountered. When the body of James was finally taken down and laid onto the cold floor itself, it was said that the body in some places was still relatively warm. James Hamer worked as a clerk under Mr. Woodcock, a local solicitor in Haslingden. Woodcock was not merely an employer, he was a figure of authority in the town, professionally connected to the Board of Guardians and entrusted with legal matters affecting the community. And in his letters, James accused individuals, implicitly including Thomas Woodcock, of valuing profit above fairness. He recounted occasions when his wage would be docked for being minutes late to work. And in one of those accounts, he arrived work 15 minutes later than normal due to the bad weather. The weather was so bad, he arrived absolutely drenched. He was wet through. He still had to work the long, hard, laborious hours. He sat behind an old wooden desk with nothing but a small fire as his heat source. He was shivering, he was cold, but yet his wages were still docked. There was no empathy from his employer. There was no gratitude that he at least got into work. There was nothing other than a wage that had been docked for being 15 minutes late.
My dear wife, as this is the last epistle I shall ever write to you, be so kind as to take care of my little children, especially the pet, as you will perceive that this is written on her birthday. And the awful deed was intended to be committed by me at the time I write it, but I took a further thought to see you all before I did it. Be so kind as to look through all my papers, and let none of them go away from you. Take them all out of my pocketbook and the drawers, and put them in a bag and pack them off. The reason assigned for so serious step is that I cannot withstand the cloud which keeps hanging over me. However I may have striven, I have always been thwarted by some individual or other fond of filthy lucre, and whose money is God. However, be this as it may, it is all over now, and no more faces will I see alive in this world. I have seen enough of those that are in it, and said but little. I will after this say less. Give my best wishes to all who may happen to inquire after me, and those who don't inquire, you don't need. But mind you keep off those friends who will take my last curse with them to the grave. Bury me at Clough Fold, and invite as many as you like or as few as you like. Invite all the union offices but one. Or if you choose, you can bury me like a dog. I don't care a straw which way. As I've seen so much of people's consciences here, that is matters little to me, so that I get out of their way. I cannot maintain the children which I am gone, but with your assistance somebody will. I know, however, I must conclude this epistle, as my time is short. Now farewell, goodbye. If there is another world, you may perhaps get to see me there. Your affectionate husband, James Hamer.
He went on to describe earning £1 a week while travelling hundreds of miles on business, often at his own expense, working long hours without additional pay or gratitude. Now, at the inquest, which took place at the Black Bull Inn and the very same public house in which Mary Ann Barnes and her father ran, it was Mary who told the jury that she did not know of any troubles which James had alluded to in his letter to her. Mary went on to say that she had left home a fortnight prior to James's death and went to stay with friends in Bacup. James called on her on Saturday the 1st of July and they both returned home on Tuesday evening. However, she had noticed that he had been very quiet when calling on her whilst over in Bacup, but she thought nothing of it. One thing Mary did make clear at the inquest was that she would say that her husband wasn't one for often complaining. He never found reason to moan about much in life. And she certainly didn't realise the issues that James was feeling inside or the emotions he was feeling when it came to his employer, Mr. Woodcock. Then when asked why he would take his own life, she had no answer to that. She couldn't find any reason why her husband wanted or would take his own life. As for Thomas Woodcock, he would paint a totally different picture of the final weeks, if not months, of James Hamer. And he would talk about how James himself had been absent from work on a regular basis. He would also mention that James was fond of the drink. He then went even further and he said that James's dismissal had already been decided. And whilst James had never been officially sacked or released from his duties at work, upon his return, or when James Hamer would finally arrive back at the office, he was going to be sacked by Mr. Woodcock. It seems that Mr. Woodcock had had enough of James's misdemeanours, his lateness, his absenteeism, the drinking, and enough was enough. So he was about to sack James. Now the question is, was James fully aware of this? Did he know that his sacking was going to happen? As for the letter addressed to George Ramsbottom and the Board of Guardians, it indicates that James's grievances extended beyond his immediate employer. The Board of Guardians oversaw the administration of the poor law in the district, managing relief for the destitute and often working closely with local solicitors. By instructing that his letter be printed and circulated among them, James sought not simple personal vindication, but public exposure. This was protest as much as a farewell. So it was here, where we are now stood, where the original Union workhouse once stood, here at the top end of Haslingden, and just in the dark shadows of St James's Church. It was the workhouse in which James Hamer, he was working as a solicitor's clerk on behalf of the Union workhouse members. And he would go out, he would receive cheques, and he would also hand cheques back over to Woodcock's solicitors. The workhouse is no longer here anymore. That has long gone. And from what I remember, there used to be a brewery that took place of that old residence. So from a workhouse to a brewery to now a public walkway. But it was most certainly here, like I said, where James Hamer himself would have walked to many, many times along paths around here and into the workhouse. And interestingly, where James Hamer used to live and where he would sadly take his own life is a 5-minute, if that, walk from here. Henry Whittaker of Rottenstall and relieving officer for the Rosendale district of the Haslingden Union, he was next to make a statement. He told of how it was customary for James to bring the cheques from the boardroom to the different relieving officers. It was required that the relieving officers and all other parties to whom they might be made payable, they should endorse their names on the cheques, prior to their being presented to the treasurer. And it was on the 16th of June, Henry told James that he did not require a cheque that day, as he had balance at hand. However, he had seen a cheque drawn in his name on the 16th of June, and this cheque was presented to the treasurer by Mr. John Lord. Thomas Woodcock would also state at the inquest that a cheque for 20 sovereigns, which was a significant sum back in 1854, had been drawn in another man's name. And for some reason, James had handed over a cheque with his signature, Henry Whittaker. And he asked Mr. John Lord to hand this over to the treasurer so he could receive the 20 sovereigns back. John Lord, the pauper, he did this, and he then went to visit James Hamer to hand over the 20 sovereigns. This was fraud. Now here in Haslingden, Woodcock's solicitors still remains, albeit in a different location to what it once originally was located in. And this is it. Well over 200 years of history right here on the doorstep. And Woodcock's plays a big role in the history of Haslingden, and I guess in the story of James Hamer. These were his former employers. Now, the inquest at the Black Bull Inn, it was extremely quick, very short in nature. And after all the key witnesses had testified, Mary Ann herself putting forward James's case, obviously Mr. Woodcock going in hard on James, the jury retired for a very, very short time, literally minutes. But when they returned into the room where this inquest was taking place, their verdict was simply straightforward: temporary insanity. 2 words to describe James Hamer and what he had done. They classed him as being temporarily insane. 2 words that reshaped the narrative. If James was insane, then his accusations did not require investigation. If he was irrational, then the system remained intact. Now, hanging in Victorian England was tragically common, and it was quite easy for people to do. The self-destruction of one's body was easily accessible. Rope was probably at hand in the household. You didn't have to go out to necessarily purchase it at the time. Everything was easily accessible. But it's the choice of location that matters in this story. James did not disappear into the countryside. He did not vanish into a river. He remained within his home, and discovery was therefore inevitable. The inquest afterwards was also inevitable. And with the inquest, the letters would be read aloud. If this was despair, it was structured despair. It was a protest, and it was carefully staged. And then there was silence. After the verdict, there was silence. Woodcocks, as we said, they continued operating in and around Haslingden. Mary herself carried on with life, raising her 3 young children. James himself left a note to Mary saying that whilst he could no longer protect his wife and children, then she perhaps should move on and find somebody who would. The letters themselves, they were read aloud. Like I said, it was a protest. It was anger, it was resentment into how James was being treated, not just by his employer, but by people such as the Board of Guardians, by Mr. Hindle. It was a letter of defiance. He wanted ultimate impact in what he was doing, and ultimate impact he would certainly get. He believed he'd given more than he was paid for. He believed others had benefited from his efforts. He believed money had replaced morality in the heart of his employer, and he chose to make that belief public before he died. In 1854 in Haslingden, a man left 4 letters. 3 were indictments, 1 was an apology. The cellar was silent, but his words were not. And more than a century and a half later, they still are not. James Hamer believed he was working for dignity and fairness, and believed those had been denied him. Now, whether his sense of injustice was entirely justified or complicated by his own actions, we can't fully know. But what we do know is this: he recorded the rain, he preserved the pencil, he cut the rope from beneath his children's bed. He addressed his wife, his employer, a pauper, an intermediary, and the governing body of his town. Then he descended into the cellar, raining fast, 7:30, and then silence. So again, I'm going back to the very start of this story. Ask yourself the question, what are you really, or what are you truly working for? Is it for dignity, self-worth? Is it to protect your loved ones by putting food on the table? Is it for self-indulgence? Or are you actually working for something far bigger and in some eyes far more important? Are you working just to make other people extremely wealthy at your expense? Now, if you enjoyed this kind of story, if you found it fascinating, please don't forget to subscribe to the Days Off our YouTube channel. We try to bring you a story each and every Monday evening. Some are extremely dark, some are kind of different in terms of the narrative, such as this story. It isn't always about murders. We do try to cover tales of people who time has seemingly forgotten, people whose names don't register anywhere else in the history books other than the local newspapers. But if you do find this content interesting, don't forget to please subscribe to the channel, don't forget to share this video, and don't forget to comment down below and tell me your thoughts on the working system and how we're all institutionalised from birth. We go to schools, we start off at primary school and work our way through all the levels of education up to universities. We leave those educational places behind, we start working. And it's the norm, isn't it? All of us do these things and it's programmed to us at a very early age. So tell us your thoughts on how we've evolved as human beings and how we find being pushed into all these, like I said, institutionalised ways of living. It would be interesting to know your thoughts. But as for James Hamer, a young man with a life to live, he felt the only way out was to take his own life. He felt no option, he felt used. He felt like his job was worthless, like he wasn't being paid his dues and what he expected.